Imagine this. You have a good life, you were raised by two loving parent figures, you found your purpose in life, you're really making a difference, you find love, and not just any old love, I mean the kind of love you live and die for. And yes, you experience pain, you lose people and it all goes wrong, but you learn to take the bad with the good because that pain is part of what it means to be alive. And so no matter how bad it gets, you'll always have those friends and family, you'll always have that love which will persevere. And then you wake up, in a big tank, covered in slime. Some old guy's there trying to talk to you. Kinda weird, but okay. Eventually you escape the old guy, you run back home, back to your friends, back to your life. But wait a minute, what the hell's this? Some guy's making out with your girlfriend. And this guy looks just like you. He goes by the same name as you. He is you. Finally, you come to the realization, those weren't your memories. That wasn't your life. That was that guy's life. You are a clone, a science project born from another man's pettiness. You have no place in this story. Are you even really alive? And so you're left with a choice. Are you going to take back your life? Sure, physically you may be a clone, but you still have all those memories. That love and joy and pain, that still feels real to you. Is that not enough? Or are you going to do the opposite? Are you going to leave the real deal in peace and go off to start fresh, abandoning your old life to begin again? This is the story of Ben Reilly, Spider-Man's genetic clone. How he had everything taken from him before he even started, and how he managed to rise above that and build a life for himself. Now you think this story would have a happy ending, that Ben would finally get some peace after all he's been through. But no. For some reason, Marvel still refuses to let him rest, and not even the sweet release of death can free him from his pain. Ben Reilly first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 149, only he wasn't called Ben Reilly yet, he was just referred to as the Clone. This was the 1970s, in which Peter had recently lost Gwen Stacy, and so he's going through absolute hell, while still having to put on the costume and fight a bunch of villains. One such villain is the Jackal, a mad scientist who just so happened to be in love with Gwen, and now blames Spider-Man for her death. And so, the Jackal uses his scientific knowledge to create a bunch of clones, with the goal of psychologically messing with Peter. First, he creates a clone of Gwen, which leads to Peter having a psychotic break. Then, he takes it a step further, and clones Peter himself. Now, both Peters think that they're the original, leading to a fight between them while the Jackal sits back and laughs his ass off. In the end, the clone is conveniently killed off, so we don't have to deal with two Spider-Men, the Jackal is defeated, and everyone goes home happy. But hang on, this is the real Peter, right? I mean, if what the Jackal says is true, there should be no way for Peter to tell if he's the original, unless he does like a insane amount of scientific testing. Fortunately for Peter, he loves a bit of scientific testing. Peter runs through an exhaustive list of tests, but before he looks at the final result, he does a bit of soul searching. He reflects on his life and his love for Mary Jane. That sort of love can't be made in a lab, and no piece of paper is going to tell him otherwise. After all, he's far too busy for an existential crisis. He's got weddings to go to, he's got to watch Aunt May flirt with Dr. Octopus, he's getting hunted to the ends of the earth by his own Spider-Mobile. And so Peter moves on with his life, with the clone being forgotten about for a long, long time. Flash forward to the 90s, where we get a bunch of backstory for the clone. We see his birth and the multiple rounds of brainwashing he was subjected to by the Jackal. Jackal's awesome torture method is to make the clone relive all of his worst experiences. The loss of his parents, Uncle Ben, Gwen, the fear of losing MJ and Aunt May, the fear that his enemies could blow up his house at any moment. Jackal does this to trap the clone in the past, to say, this is all you are and all you ever will be. But he also leaves a little bit of room for doubt. He makes these illusions and plays tricks on him, saying, hey, all this pain that I'm bringing up for you, I could just be lying, right? I'm gonna spoon feed you the past, and you basically have to take my word for it. What this does is it gets in the clone's head. It makes him think, okay, this truth that makes up who I am, that defines my self-worth and sense of identity, that belongs to someone else. And this makes it much, much easier for the Jackal to control him. So, the Jackal has the clone fight himself, and in the end, the Jackal fakes the clone's death. He then swaps out the clone's body for another clone, one that's actually dead, and then lets the actual clone go free. And this is kinda dumb, right? You've spent ages engineering this clone, you've planned all of this smoke and mirrors, and you've built him up to be your perfect little lab rat, and now you're just gonna give up on him? Like, alright, trust the process, I guess. The clone eventually figures out what's going on, realises that he's the clone, and has a complete mental breakdown. He can't see his family or friends, he can't risk coming into conflict with the real Peter again. If he were to disappear, nothing would change in the world. He has no purpose. He's nothing. So what to do now? He can't stay, so the only thing he can do is leave. He gathers what little belongings he can take, stops off at Aunt May's house for the very last time, and sets off to get as far away as possible. This is the key part of Jackal's brainwashing. This is why he put so much effort separating the clone's body and mind, his consciousness from the world, and convinced him that his memories were just this abstract nightmare out to haunt him. Because by trapping him in the past, the clone now can't imagine his own future. He can't possibly imagine that the real Peter would accept him, and they could team up to stop the Jackal, and maybe he could live a normal life. And so the Jackal never needed to lock him up. He can just be left to wander, because this sense of directionlessness, this lack of identity, is a prison in its own right. We see this when he's heading towards the other end of the country in a bus packed with passengers. Suddenly, the bus blows a tyre, putting everyone on board in mortal danger. Now the clone could save everyone, but he doesn't. He does nothing, because it's much easier to retreat into his own subjective world than accept his situation is real. You also have to remember that the clone is fresh out the 70s. For him, Gwen's death is very much an open wound, and he's still in that pit of despair. And for the original Peter, the turning point was MJ, it was Aunt May. It was fellow heroes that all provided the necessary company to turn him around, to make him realise that he wasn't alone and let him reach a stage in his life where he was truly happy. The existence of the clone asks, what if? What if Peter Parker never turned around? What if he kept going down that path of despair without any loved ones to comfort him? While in the past, Peter would be self-destructive, the clone is now outright wishing to die. While Peter would get angry and lash out at those who didn't deserve it, the clone is now beating up members of the public in a fit of rage. It's all of Peter's bad traits stretched to their limits. There's this poor guy, Cliff, who's also having a hard time. His wife's left him, he's lost his kids, etc. He's the perfect guy for the clone to relate to. And they do this all the time in Spider-Man. When he's down in the dumps, they give him a guy who's in a similar situation, and that forces him to reevaluate his own problems and get better as a result. But the clone? He's out of empathy. He projects his sense of worthlessness onto Cliff, telling Cliff to off himself, telling him that no one would care if he disappeared. The clone is at rock bottom, and all he can think to do is climb over other people to get out. The bartender says, hey, that's enough, right? He pulls a gun on him, to which the clone just laughs. You think a thing like that could hurt me? Do you know who I am? And blah 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 and such, and just as he's about to break the guy's wrist, he freezes. This action grounds him in the physical world, and the clone realises that what he's doing is real. Because what's more important, this abstract nightmare telling him that he's useless and leeching off his pain, or a real physical person, right there, who needs help, and probably doesn't want his wrist getting broken? This is the real turning point for the clone. He's flooded with memories. He remembers Uncle Ben's decency, Aunt May's kindness, the times in the past where he did nothing and paid the price for it. And with this, he says, fuck you, Jackal, and essentially rewrites his own memories. They're not nightmares to be haunted by, they're filled with goodness and love and power and responsibility. He doesn't need some gremlin telling him what the truth is, those memories are true enough. And he uses this new body of truths to free himself from the Jackal's grasp. He reunites his consciousness with the world. He breaks down the door of Cliff's hotel room and he says, you're not going anywhere, Cliff! In the next few moments, the clone convinces Cliff that he does have something to live for, that he can take this as an opportunity to start fresh, and the clone can't help but be inspired by his own advice. The Jackal had tried to use the clone's memories against him, but in the end, his memories were the very thing that saved him. And with this new ownership over the past, the clone picks a new name for himself. His uncle's first name and his aunt's maiden name, distinguishing himself enough from Peter Parker while still staying true to his roots. With this, Ben takes a new vow of responsibility. A promise to never give up on himself. And he sets off once again, yes, directionless, yes, without any loved ones, but he's carrying a little bit more hope this time. Throughout the next couple of years, Ben basically follows the same path as Peter, only in a slightly more edgier setting. He learns to love life again, he meets a red-headed girl with a dark past, and the two fall in love. By being there for each other, they're able to help each other process their own traumas, and Ben finally gets to a place where things are looking up for him. As Peter Parker swings about the streets of New York, Ben roams the West, helping out where he can and trying not to get noticed in the process. Unfortunately, wherever Spider-Man goes, tragedy follows. Ben fights his past in the form of Kane, another clone of Peter who is deformed. He's one of Jackal's failed experiments. As Ben's life gradually gets better, Kane continues to degenerate, causing him to develop a deep hatred for Ben. Kane then goes after Ben's girlfriend, Janine, going so far as to fake her death. That way, Ben will think that his girlfriend just hated him so much that she'd rather die than be with him. Shortly after Janine's supposed death, Ben receives word that Aunt May back home has suffered a massive stroke. Now, if you've been reading this book for a long time, you'll know that Aunt May getting sick is nothing to worry about. She's been sick again and again and again. She could be thrown into a black hole and still find her way back. But for Ben, this is serious stuff. With his life in the West having seemingly crumbled, Ben returns home to check on Aunt May. Too worried about losing another loved one, Ben's not as careful as he should be, and eventually runs into the guy he'd been avoiding for the past 5 years. Naturally, Peter freaks out, calling Ben a fake, a trick played on him by one of his enemies. This is hard on Ben, as even though he manages to get away, suddenly all of his insecurities are at the forefront of his mind again. He starts to struggle with his identity once more. Around this time, Peter's also going through it. As part of a plot by the Chameleon, he'd just met his long-lost parents, only for it to be revealed that they were fake. This emotionally wrecked Peter, and this eventually spread to Mary Jane and Aunt May, and then everyone and everything in his life just became shit. To top this off, Peter is also taking on some wizard mutant guy who appears far too powerful for him. It's very clear that if Peter continues down this path, he will be killed. His recklessness, his declining mental state, combined with the sheer power his enemies hold, these are all pointing towards an early death. The funny thing is, this could be everything Ben ever wanted. If Peter dies, Ben could just take his place. He could go back to his family and friends, back to his old life. Sure, he'd have a bit of catching up to do, but it's what he deserves, right? After all this time. And yeah, the Ben from 5 years ago might have done exactly that. His detachment from the world would have made it easy just to sit back and let Peter die. But not anymore. Even though his own life will be worse off, Ben still chooses to go and save Peter. He once again gives up a chance at his old life, but this time it's not out of fear, instead a desire to do the right thing. Ben joins Peter in the fight against the wizard guy, and saves Peter's life. While Peter is reluctant to accept Ben's help at first, he eventually comes around, and the two work side by side to save the day. With this, Ben starts to accept the idea that maybe two Spider-Men could coexist in the same city. And so he creates his own costume, once again distinguishing himself enough from Peter while still staying true to his roots. After seeing Ben's strength, it inspires Peter to overcome his own problems and navigate the darkness he'd been dealing with for so long. Spider-Man's always had his indomitable will, right? There's always been times where he's saved himself. It's just never been as literal before. Filled with hope, Peter continues on as Spider-Man, while Ben operates as the brand new Scarlet Spider. Eventually, Peter and Ben become proper allies, and friends even. And let me tell you, Ben is probably like the best friend you could ever ask for. There's a big plot twist at the end of the first act of the Clone Saga. Basically, it's revealed that Peter is actually the clone, and Ben is the original Peter Parker, having been tricked by the Jackal all those years ago. This obviously turned out to be fake, just another plot to mess with Peter, but at the time it was played like it was the complete truth. Now Peter, being the decent guy that he is, says, okay, fair is fair. I'm the clone, Ben, you can take your life back and I'll go away. But Ben says no. He'd rather carry the burden of being a clone, even though he doesn't have to, so that Peter can still live his life. And even when Peter lashes out and gets violent due to just how stressful the situation is, Ben is patient and talks him through it and promises to help him every step of the way. When Peter gets framed for murder, when Kane's fingerprints are mistaken for his and he has to go through a whole trial for 15 issues, Ben takes his place in prison. Ben gives up his freedom so that Peter can be there for his family. When Peter finds out that MJ is pregnant and coincidentally starts to lose his powers around the same time, he starts to think that maybe he should settle down and be there for his daughter. Still, he has a responsibility to the city, but Ben's like, hey, don't worry bro, and takes over as Spider-Man so Peter can be with Mary Jane. Despite all that he does for Peter, despite all of his selfless acts, Ben barely gets anything in return. And I don't mean that Peter's a huge dick to him or anything, I just mean the general hand he gets played in life. While Peter is happy with Mary Jane and is overjoyed by the idea that he's going to start a family, Ben is not as lucky when it comes to love. And what I mean by that is that one of his girlfriends turns out to be the daughter of Uncle Ben's killer. When Aunt May sadly succumbs to her illness, Peter gets to embrace his loved ones indoors while Ben sits on the roof, forced to grieve by himself. Even on Christmas Day, while Peter's spending time with his family, Ben spends Christmas alone, rounding up criminals. And yes, he's making a difference and he's joking about his situation, but you can kind of tell that he's hurting on the inside. I think the thing that really takes the cake is when his old girlfriend, Janine, shows up alive and well, only for her to get arrested anyway. It's framed as this bittersweet closure, and I agree with that for the most part, but just give the guy a fucking break. Ben continues on as Spider-Man, going on all sorts of adventures. He fights his fair share of villains, he saves lives, he becomes Spider Carnage, and one of my favourite moments during this time, or maybe just Spider-Man in general, is in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 240. Peter is high on the sheer determination to be a good father. He's madly in love with Mary Jane, and they're both really hopeful for the future. It's gotten to the point where Ben is just a normal part of their lives, and he comes and goes just like he would if he were a normal family member. Peter and Ben go through their old boxes, talking about their memories and how much they miss their aunt and uncle. The two refer to each other as brothers, and Peter's like, I love you man, and yeah, it's great, I love it so much. It feels like everything was building to this moment, all of Peter's life, his progression through high school and university, loss, love, marriage. It's all built up to this one moment in his life, where his daughter is about to be born, and finally he's going to have that happiness, and all he needs to do is wait. It's the same with Ben. His life is built up to the point where he has family and friends. He has ownership over his memories. He has that physical proof of his past. And sure, he might not get lucky and continue to suffer, but he's happy for what he has and for the people around him. The bit that really gets me is when they're leaving the house, and the topic of Peter's daughter comes up. Ben is saying how much he envies Peter, and how he can't wait to be an uncle. Peter's daughter will have her own Uncle Ben, who will pass on the lesson of responsibility as his own uncle did many years ago. The only downside to these moments is that they're part of a larger story arc, because while this arc does have its moments that are very nice, the story as a whole is unfortunately a tragedy. Peter and Ben's time together is cut short by the return of the Green Goblin. It's revealed that Norman was behind everything, the Jackal, the clones, the plot twists, everything. This was totally the plan all along and not just a last minute retcon ordered by editor-in-chief at the time Bob Harris because he was just sick of the whole clone thing and wanted to resolve things as quickly as possible. No, the story had been naturally building to this the whole time. Norman's holding all of Peter's loved ones hostage. Betty, Flash, Liz, Jonah, Robbie. They're all in a building rigged to explode. And so Peter takes on Norman, while Ben promises to get everyone to safety. It's here that Ben's selflessness really shines. He rushes in, using his strength to free the hostages. When one of the bombs explodes prematurely, Ben saves Flash by taking most of the blast himself. Bleeding out from the explosion, Ben keeps going and takes the rest of the bombs far away from his friends. Once everyone is safe, he reunites with Peter, who has beaten the Goblin, and lets him know the good news. But the Goblin has one last trick up his sleeve, and he does the thing he always does. He activates his glider for a sneak attack and sends it towards Spider-Man. Instinctively, Ben takes the hit for his brother, with the glider piercing through his chest as he plunges down into the street below. Peter rushes down to Ben, determined to save him while being in denial of his injuries. Now, we in the 2020s obviously know that Peter isn't the clone, that the plot twist was fake, but to the characters, that possibility is still very real. Peter could easily still be the clone, and he's still very worried about it. Ben's final gift to Peter is to say, I don't care. You're my brother. You're as real as I am. You're Spider-Man. Even in Ben's final moments, he's still looking out for his brother. He frees Peter from this doubt, and it allows Peter to go on stronger than ever. Ben does have one request though, and he's not asking for much. As he takes his last breaths, he says, "Take care of my niece, Peter. Tell her about her Uncle Ben." As tragic as Ben's death is, I think it's very fitting. You see, being Spider-Man is a choice. It's choosing to step up and do the right thing, knowing full well you might not get anything in return. You can't have bravery without a genuine risk. And sure, you might get lucky, and you might get the girl, and you might get the happy ending you deserve, but you might not. And that's what makes that choice so powerful. Because yeah, Ben got nothing in the end, but his fate gives meaning to all of his selfless acts. And while he died for his brother, his memory will live on in the daughter he wishes he could have had. Or at least, that's what I would have liked to have happened. It's no secret that the 90s were tough for Spider-Man, behind the scenes. The Clone Saga started off as a passion project. A bunch of writers and artists had genuine reasons as to why this story was going to be exciting, and just what Spider-Man needed. Then, as the years went on, writers were swapped out, Marvel got new bosses, no one knew how to end the story, and it got to the point where they just made a parody comic of the whole thing. One of the planned endings was to have Ben permanently replace Peter as Spider-Man. That way Peter could get his happy ending and raise his daughter, while you still had a Spider-Man in the main books. Then Bob Harris came in, told everyone to stop the whole clone shit, and so they got rid of Ben, and the baby too, for good measure. Peter's character progression slowed down, and kept slowing down over the next 10 years. You have Aunt May coming back multiple times, and it gets to the point where no one can stay dead, and any meaningful change in Peter's life will be inevitably reversed. This isn't exclusive to Peter, it's just more of a symptom of comics in general, really. It's just that it was really noticeable, post-Clone Saga. Then, in 2016, we get Clone Conspiracy, which I think is written as a critique, or almost a parody of modern Spider-Man, because it undoes pretty much everything. Oh, you thought the Rhino was dead? Nope, he's back. You thought Dr. Octopus redeemed himself as the superior Spider-Man? You thought he learned to invest in other people? Nope, he's back as his old self. It gets to the point where every person who has ever died in a Spider-Man comic is brought back to life, which is just so over the top that I can't help but kind of appreciate it. Of course, every person includes Ben Reilly, who turns out got revived by the Jackal from the moment of his death. The Jackal then kills Ben and resurrects him over and over again. He says it's for scientific purposes, but we all know he's just that much of a dick. Eventually, Ben manages to break free, takes over the Jackal's operation, and plans to use the cloning technology for good. He then tracks down Peter and says, look at the gifts I have. I can bring everyone we've ever loved back to life. Won't you accept my gifts, Peter? Won't you accept I'm of sound mind? Ben's final plan is to bring back Uncle Ben. It's where the story threatens to unravel 50 years of Spider-Man history and undo the very first story. There's nothing left to undo at this point. Might as well tear it all down. Everything is meaningless. Of course, this isn't the point of the story. All of these clones and retcons are there to prove the exact opposite. Because at the end of the day, Ben is wrong. All of these old characters have no place in the current story, and instead of fixating on the past, we should really learn to move forward. No matter how hard it is, we must let go of the old and embrace the new. Now, this would be a great message, one that would be really relevant given the last couple decades of Spider-Man comics. The only problem is that, yeah, the story says we need to let these old characters go, and then doesn't even hesitate as it sets up a new Ben Reilly series where he's once again haunted by his past and has to learn to be a hero again and is still getting hunted down by Kane. And so we get Ben Reilly the Scarlet Spider in 2017, then he dies again and comes back to life, then he takes over as Amazing Spider-Man for a bit, and then we get Ben Reilly Spider-Man, only it's set back in the 90s when I still cared about this character. Now I don't want to comment on the quality of the runs themselves, except Ben Reilly Spider-Man, I love you, but it's just hard to care when each of the series seems to reset Ben's progress, and never really gives a good reason as to why they brought him back in the first place. You look at what he's up to now, and he's trying to unleash hell on New York and eat Peter's soul, and it's like, what the fuck for? Ben used to suffer despite his actions. Now it's like he suffers because of his actions. Just let my boy rest. Okay, so Ben is evil now and will never get peace. Peter's lost Mary Jane and will likely never get back together with her. These characters will be stuck in a medium designed to go on forever, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So what's the point in being miserable? The great thing about comics is that time works differently as it does in movies, say. Every moment on the page is happening simultaneously. All it takes is a glance to bring them to life. It all depends on how fast you read, what voices you hear when you read the dialogue. You can read it backwards if you want. And the creators can do their best to control the flow of panels, bigger panels for bigger moments, decompression to slow down time. But in the end, a lot of the experience is down to the reader's imagination. Because of this, comics is one of the easiest mediums for you to just make shit up. Like, you can just pretend this stuff doesn't exist. Like, you can just do that for free in your head. The government can't stop you. If I want, I can just pretend that Ben died so that Peter could live. Peter then went on to have a daughter, she grew up, and then I can treat the Spider-Girl series as canon. However, I'm also a fan of Straczynski's run in the 2000s, and so when I'm reading that, I'll just adapt my headcanon on the fly. Okay, so Ben died, Peter and MJ lost the baby, but their relationship persevered and then they went on to have more adventures. Sure, Peter's identity is revealed to the world in Civil War and his Aunt May gets shot, but his love for MJ is enough to get him through it. The end. Don't have to waste a breath complaining about anything. And you know what? If I want to read some of the modern stuff, which I still really love, I can just treat it in isolation, where the past and future is fluid, and I just don't think about it too hard. Yeah, if you care about something you love, you'll fight for it. You'll whine about it. You'll make a 40-minute YouTube video about it. But don't let what's happening now affect your enjoyment of what came before. So if everyone just collectively pretends that Ben Reilly died in 1996, then at least we'll all be a lot happier. That's my solution. Delusion! Who knows, maybe if everyone's busy believing in Neverland and no one's there to take the engagement bait that is modern Spider-Man, maybe they'll start making a good story rather than just counting on the outrage of the internet for sales. Anyway, I'm gonna go play Spider-Man on the PS5, which I stole from Sainsbury's. Make sure to like and subscribe, and that actually is an admission of guilt, Sainsbury's, I stole a PS5 from you. That's what you get for being stuck-up bastards. Alright, hope you enjoyed. Peace.
Could you ever know how much I care? Could you ever know how much out there there's a boy who really hurts? Since I found you, I found a girl.